On this episode of the No City on the Sideline Dad, my guest, Rob Cornelius, founder of CEO of GameFace Inc. He's the international bestseller, author of the book Sales Game Change: How to Become the Salesperson People Love. He's also a dad of three boys, which that's kind of a connection we have with, as fathers. Welcome to the podcast, Robert.
Hey, thanks, Joe. It's great to be with you, especially on this show.
Thanks. I really do appreciate it. Thanks so much for being here tonight. It's one thing I'd like to start off with an intro question, because we're talking about sales and how dads are salespeople at home and stuff like that. But what is a salesperson to you?
A salesperson is an individual who has good intentions, usually properly trained, and has a desire to improve the condition or the life of the person with whom they are interacting.
That's interesting. Another thing, one too, is I get phone calls all day from salespeople pitching me stuff all the time. And why do we hang up them so quickly? I don't understand why. Because I'm driving and they're like, "Hi, we have your insurance company. We want to sell you this." I'm like, "I'm driving. Why are you calling me? And you're an insurance company. You should know better."
Well, I think there's several reasons. It could be bad timing, like you suggest. That's a no-no, but sometimes it's unavoidable because we can't see what the prospect is doing at that moment. But usually we hang up on salespeople because we're prejudging them based on past experience with other bad or poorly trained salespeople, or they're using certain words right out of the gate that just kind of grate on us. They're using a false attempt at building rapport and chit chat that we know is insincere. And the third or fourth reason is, and this is all comes within the first nanoseconds of the call. The fourth reason is that salespeople have this terrible tendency, because they've been trained so much in their product, that they want to start talking about their product very quickly. And product universally is objectionable. Doesn't matter what you're selling. It's objectionable to one person or millions of people because of its price, because of its size, its color, whatever the case may be. So when you start a conversation with something that I can object to, then you've done yourself in as a salesperson. And we as customers, we as consumers, we don't like talking about things that are objectionable. We like talking about things that are agreeable.
Interesting too. I mean, I try to be nice to them. I know they have a job and they're doing their job, but sometimes they just catch you at the wrong moment. It's like, it happens. Well, but interesting too. I like the name of your book, the Sales Game Changer, and becoming the salesperson people love. How did that all come about?
Well, the book has been, I got to tell you, it's been in the works for about a quarter of a century. And so, shame on me. I think a lot of authors, on the other hand, a lot of authors maybe write a book before they really should, before they've had enough experience and testing of their theories and hypotheses, so that they can actually say with confidence that what I'm writing about works. In my case, I gave it about 25 years to make sure what I was talking about was working. And that's because I started my own business 26 years ago. And for those years, I was developing not only the content, but I was also, I know this is going to sound a little bit self-congratulatory, but I was frankly so busy trying to service my clients that I just kept delaying or putting off the book. And one of the greatest compliments my clients would give to me, in fact, I write about this in the acknowledgement section of the book, is they kept asking me, "Rob, where's the book? Do you have a book? When's your book coming out?" And I'd have to just kind of sheepishly make an excuse. And so ironically, during the pandemic, especially in 2020, when most of us had to kind of just lay low, that gave me an opportunity to just hunker down and write and put all those thoughts and all those ideas that we've been sharing with our clients for years, finally put them into book form. And then the title, The Sales Game Changer, I've been told by so many, literally thousands of people that we've worked with, that we have been a game changer for their life, for their career, for their relationships. And so I just couldn't think of a better way to describe this methodology, this approach to selling and persuading and influencing other people.
It's interesting too. How do you get involved in something? How did you start out in this kind of field?
Well, I took a route that I did not expect, as I'm sure many dads do. I mean, very few of us are in a profession that we anticipated when we were growing up that we'd be in, or it doesn't even match our degrees, maybe if we got a college degree. So in my case, I was working in Hollywood, of all places, shortly after graduating from university. And long story short, I got a job working for, at the time, what Sports Illustrated called the worst franchise in the history of sports. And this club was the beloved Los Angeles Clippers of the early 1990s. Oh. And for any of your fans, Joe, who are sports fans, they know that the Clippers back in those days really stunk. And why did I get a job with them? Because someone I had met who was a sales manager at the Clippers saw something in me, and he thought that, I think you could sell a really bad product for us. So I was hired to sell tickets, season tickets, whatever, whatever someone would buy, I could sell it. I was permitted to sell it. Well, at first I struggled mightily because the product was lousy and I didn't know what I was doing. I liked basketball, so that was good, but I thought enthusiasm would carry the day. And frankly, the more enthusiastic I was about a bad team, the crazier people thought I was on the phone. So that didn't help. So eventually, long story short, and of course I write about this extensively in the book, and I figured out a way to sell LA Clippers tickets, not to trick people and not to deceive people, but a way that would actually bring value to fathers, families, companies. And as a result of that, I started to set sales records, and I got some attention from the NBA. I was asked to share my ideas with all the other teams. This started to blossom into more sports teams calling me from all kinds of sports markets. And after 3 years of this, I finally figured out, hey, I think I've got a business here. And that's when I started my company called GameFace Incorporated. And we've worked with about 300 sports teams around the world in the last 25, 26 years. And we also now work with hundreds of companies in other, what I'd call real businesses. And we teach people how to sell, how to win clients, how to keep clients. And I don't think there's any better industry to prove out this model than in the sports industry, where you got some of the most fickle or some of the most ferocious customers alive. And those are, demanding sports fans.
It's interesting too, watching stuff like that in the marketing stuff. Especially, I noticed a lot of like people trying to sell tickets, especially for minor league teams, and how impressive they are when they're really pitching to the families and really get them into the stands. Was that something like that you did during the 90s for the Clippers?
You're absolutely right. That's a very good observation, Joe, because in the minor leagues, unlike the majors, you don't have player name recognition to go on. In fact, with most minor league teams, they don't even know who's on their roster until a week before opening day. So instead, in the minors, you have to be even more creative and innovative to find ways to make the game experience memorable and valuable to the attendee. And that's really what I did at the Clippers, as you suggested, because we didn't have a team that people wanted to come see. They wanted to go see the Lakers or the LA Kings or the LA Dodgers and all the other sports enterprises in Southern California. So what I had to do is I had to figure out, look, I'd ask myself, and literally, I made this observation the first game that I attended as an employee. I looked up into the stands as the game was starting because I was curious, who's coming to Clippers games? Because I can't find these people on the phone, right? And so I looked up, and granted, we had a lot of empty seats that first game. But the first thing I noticed, Joe, and I think your audience will appreciate this, was a dad sitting with his son. He had his arm around his young boy, and he was whispering into his ear. And his son had this very attentive look on his face, staring down at the court. And I couldn't hear what they were saying, obviously, but I could imagine what they were saying. And what I concluded, based on their expressions, was that dad was teaching his son such things as hard work, discipline, sportsmanship, fair play, teamwork, not to mention the X's and O's of basketball. And it occurred to me, because at the time I was an expectant father. I had yet to have children, but we were expecting our first son at that time. And it occurred to me, you know what? Dad didn't bring his son to the game tonight to watch a win. That's nice if it happens, but in Clipperville back then, you don't bet on it. Instead, he's coming to the game because he wants to teach his son important life lessons, not to mention enhance their relationship and build memories together. So you know what, Joe? From the very next day on, I stopped selling the Clippers. I sold the results you can get from the Clippers. And that changed my career entirely.
It's also the moments too, like family moments, like the time, the bonding moments, being there at the game with the son and the father there and sharing that moment. It's not about the $10 bucket of popcorn or the banner and Clippers, go Clippers. It's more about the moment, spending time. That's what I would be if me and my son were watching the game.
That's right. And when we gather for the holidays this year, right? We have the holidays coming up now, Thanksgiving, Christmas. When you see, you know, family members you haven't seen for a while, or your parents or your grandparents, what are they going to talk about? What are you going to talk about? You're going to talk about in many cases, those special moments you had, memories that you built together. And in the sports industry or the entertainment industry in general, they are the venue by which those memories occur. And so I'd always tell people, I'm not trying to make you a Clippers fan. You want to be a Lakers fan? Go for it. They're a great team. Instead, what I'm going to ensure happens is when you come to our game, I'm going to make sure that with your kid, with your grandchild, you have an experience that you'll be living and talking about for years to come that will strengthen the bond of that relationship. That's what I'm selling. And then on the business side, when I talk to a business about buying, say, season tickets or a suite or what have you, it wasn't about, you know, this is the year we're going all the way, because that would be a lie. It was instead, hey, you want to win over new clients? You want to keep the clients you've already got? You want to stand apart from your competition? You want to build better teamwork in your office? You know how one very effective way you can do that? Utilizing a Clippers game. And I will be there to make sure you get that result.
Well, it's interesting too. You talk about memories, sharing memories and stuff at the time of Thanksgiving stuff. I want to share a memory with you. My son's first baseball game. He doesn't remember the game. He just remembers that Dad got off the wrong tee stop to get to Fenway Park.
Yeah, that's funny. You know, I think back to my sons. As you mentioned in the lead in, I've got 3 boys. They're all grown now. But one of our greatest memories is we used to do a sports weekend where we would travel to a particular city, be it New York, Chicago, Dallas, wherever, Los Angeles, and we would have a weekend of sporting events. It's not because we were fans of those particular teams or even of the sport, but we knew that that was going to be a memory building environment and opportunity. And we still talk about it today. And it's wonderful that I could be a part of an industry that does that for families.
Well, it's interesting too, and stuff like that. Taking the skills as a salesperson and translate them into, you know, being a good father, good mom, a good parent. How does that translate?
Well, I think it translates whether we admit it or not, whether we know it or not. For example, when I am trying to persuade my son to do his homework, when I'm trying to convince my wife that taking our kids out to ice cream, even though they haven't finished all their chores, when I am trying to influence his or her coach to perhaps, you know, give my son or daughter a chance, we are influencing, persuading, motivating, inspiring, educating every single day as fathers. And that is the essence of selling. Selling is not tricking. Selling is not twisting an arm. Selling is using our best communication tools, which includes listening, to persuade someone to improve, as I said earlier, to improve their situation, ultimately to improve their life. And so the fact that I can sell professionally and get paid for it is wonderful. But whether or not that's my job or my role at work, I still have to do it at home. In fact, I would say to be a dad, you had to use sales skills to get the mom, right?
Yeah. That's true. That's true, right? That's true. But it's interesting too. Sometimes people think like selling stuff can become like manipulating people, and that could be a bad thing. I think so. I think.
Oh, absolutely. It is a bad thing to manipulate. So I'd rather motivate than to manipulate. And how does that happen? It happens several ways. As I mentioned at the outset, the word choice, and one of the things that we don't like about salespeople is that we can kind of sense that they're manipulating us because they're trying to like butter us up, if you will. And so that's one thing that I always try to convince, or not convince, but I always try to convey to salespeople is that when you start a call, most salespeople will do this, especially when they're calling someone they don't know. Let's say I'm calling you, Joe, for the first time. You're my prospect. You're a lead that somehow I've uncovered. And you pick up the phone and say hello. And I'll immediately come back with, hey, Joe, how are you today? And as soon as you get "how are you today" from a voice or a name that you don't recognize, what do you immediately know about me, Joe?
I'm not sure actually.
That I'm a salesperson.
Oh, that's true. Yes. There you go.
I mean, it's even subliminal. It's like I got a sales guy on the line, right? Because the only people who ask strangers on the phone how they're doing are salespeople. Or maybe people who work for the IRS, but and they're still salespeople too. So it's when you get that kind of cheesy opening, you go, okay, this guy is trying to manipulate me, right? He's trying to butter me up. And so we get resistant. I like to say we pull the drawbridge up. So what I teach salespeople is from the outset of that first call to that one hot prospect, every prospect you call, what are you going to say so that they trust you, even though they don't know you? They trust you enough to allow you to continue. In other words, they entrust their time and energy and attention to you. It's word choice. And it's also, what is your intention? Is your intention to sell something, or is your intention to serve someone?
Well, it's interesting too. And now I'm thinking about the dad part of it and stuff like that, in the sense that word choices we use around kids, like our sons, and get them to do what you want, but also build rapport. Something you mentioned before.
Yeah. Here's the age-old bad question that dads ask at the end of the day when we're sitting around the kitchen table, if we are lucky enough to have a meal with our friends, with our family. So how was school today? Fine. Right? Now, can you imagine if a sales call went that way?
We wouldn't get anywhere.
No. So what's a better way of asking those types of questions? Well, we don't ask the questions. We actually invite them to tell us. So there's several ways to do this. So instead of saying, how was school today? I would say something like, tell me about school today. Share with me something that happened at school today with your friends. Describe for me what you learned in the classroom. Give me an idea of something that happened that was memorable or funny to you at school. So, and the list of questions, of possible questions, can go on and on and on, longer than this interview. So it's the question we ask, and that will either engage us into a conversation with our kids, create a dialogue, or we can just settle for the old dad monologue.
What is the old dad monologue?
Well, the old dad monologue is, preaching to your kid or lecturing to them, or it's really just asking a bunch of questions that lead to a what I call cul-de-sac questions. Cul-de-sac questions lead to yes/no answers. They just don't get us anywhere. They don't further the conversation, which means they don't enrich the relationship.
No, it's funny. Like my son, I picked him up from school today. How's your day? Good. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Food. I'm like, these one-word answers not going to help you. I need to know.
Yes.
And then I probe him. Hey, listen, what was the best part of it? What was the most frustrating part of it? And then, like you just said, and it's important to get those words up, because I feel like, especially when they're young, I got to pry them. I got to poke them to give me answers.
Yeah, I know it sounds awfully formulaic to your listeners right now, to your viewers, Joe, but it's actually true. There are 7 words. There's actually more than 7, but 7 I would just share with you right now that lead to more than a one-word answer. Those words are who, what, where, when, why, how, and then kind of a variation, how much, how many, how often. Now, they may lead to one-word answers. Like when you say how often, they may say, twice a week. Or when you say where, they may say Elm Street. But at least it's contextual. It's substantive. There are other words that we can use that we tend to use as dads that don't lead to much. Those are like do, does, is, will, could, can, have, has. Those lead invariably to yes or no's. So dads, if they really want to engage in greater conversation, meaningful conversation with their children, not to mention their significant other, not to mention their colleagues at work, they would learn some of these basic sales skills.
Isn't it interesting? We're always selling, and dads and always selling our point of view and always selling what we want them to do. But how, like, I'm gonna another dad to another dad. How important is leadership to your family and your kids?
Well, dads are the forever leaders, and I'm not suggesting that mothers are not.
Mhm.
I'm just saying that a father should look at himself as the leader. He can be the co-leader, and mom and dad can take turns being leader, but I'm always trying to demonstrate leadership in my home. And even though my kids are gone, I try to demonstrate leadership. And how do I do that? I try to demonstrate leadership through example, showing interest in my kids, asking them questions, querying them in such a way that, as I said earlier, it leads to real conversation and back and forth and idea sharing and problem solving together. So for dad to relinquish that role, I think is perhaps one of our greatest sins of us as a society today. We need, and that's why I applaud your program, and I admire what you do, and I wish there were more like you, Joe, who recognize the noble calling and role of a father, and just to acknowledge it is one thing, but then to improve upon it, to recognize that even dads need skills to be a dad. And it doesn't mean just fixing the car, or it doesn't mean just, cleaning out the gutters, and it doesn't mean just earning a living. The skill of communication, of conversation. I was talking to someone recently we're probably going to get together for Thanksgiving with this other family. And we were talking about some people that they may be inviting that they're a little uncomfortable with. These are relatives that they're a little uncomfortable with just because there's a lot of prickliness going on today with pandemic and politics and other issues. And I just suggested to this gentleman, I said, you know what? I can teach you how to carve up the turkey, not your relatives, with just 5 simple words. 5 words that would diffuse the feud that may develop around the table. And so I think fathers should look for that. They should look for ways to improve themselves as the master communicator, the initiator of good conversation in their homes.
What, if you can share some of one of the 5 words?
Yeah, well, the 5 words are among the 7 I shared with you. Instead of, so do you think, what do you think? Instead of would you, how about how would you? So it's just changing the beginning of your questions and recognizing that rather than you always being the one to share your opinion, you will be much more magnetic as a personality. In fact, some people would even use the word charismatic as a personality. If you would find other ways for other people to share their thoughts and feelings, you'll become the most beloved person around the table. That doesn't mean that you can't share yours, because invariably they're going to ask you, they're going to reciprocate. That's just human nature. If you start and ask someone a question and get them to really open up and don't just take their first answer, delve further. Another word that I like to use is go on. Here's another one. Tell me more. Even after they think they're done. No, tell me more. That will send a signal to them that you're not just asking for the sake of asking and creating conversation to fill up the dead air. You're genuinely interested. And when they conclude, they invariably will say, well, what about you? What do you think? And now we're in a civil discourse. So these are the kinds of small tips. Again, at the risk of sounding like I'm a pitch man, we cover these extensively in the Sales Game Changer. But in fact, I just did a training earlier today with an organization actually overseas. They don't even speak English.
Oh, wow.
And I was sharing with them these words in English and having an interpreter do the translation for me on this virtual training session. And one of the women in the audience said, you know, I'm realizing that these skills, these simple skills, these little turns of the knob are not only going to help me be a better business person, they're going to help me be a better spouse and mother. And I said, you know what? Let's close it down. You just
you figured it out.
That's it.
That's what was interesting too about the whole topic about being a father and the game changer. Who was one of the people that really influenced you to become who you are today?
That's a very appreciated question. It was my grandfather. My grandfather had this uncanny knack of being able to ask people questions where you thought there's really nothing else to say. There's nothing else to talk about. Or my grandfather had nothing in common with this particular individual. Yet when I would see him engage or interact with someone, he could always inquire so as to get that person to open up. Didn't matter who they were, what position, what title, what income, what educational level they were at. He always started conversations by showing interest in them. And so I didn't really recognize this as much as a kid, but when I got older and I saw this and I began to put my finger on it, I thought, my grandfather, he's a game changer. And he was beloved by people, even people who met him one time. And I think the reason was because those interactions were not about him. They were about them. And if we can do that in sales, just think how marvelous our sales encounters would be. If we could do that when we're interviewing for a job. I know that when we interview for a job, Joe, the emphasis is on the candidate, right? Because you got to prove yourself, which by the way is it's a sales exercise. But what if during the interview, I'm not saying you won't answer their questions about your candidacy and about your qualifications. Of course, you'll do that. But what about when they turn the tables and say, so do you have any questions? Instead of saying, well, when does the when does the benefits kick in? How about if we said something like, and I'm just making something up off the top of my head, I might just say, what are some of the things you've learned in your career to get you where you are today that you think might help me if I'm a part of this team? Or what could I do to make your life easier? Or how will you know that you've made the right hire 6 months from now if you choose me? In other words, it's all about you, job interviewer, hiring manager. As much as you think it's about me, as much as you may think I think it's about me, I'm here to benefit you. How can I do that? How can I be more like you? How can I meet your expectations? And when you put the emphasis on that, you become the candidate they love.
Building rapport, the word rapport, building that rapport again. That word comes up in my mind, what you're saying when you're talking.
I can't disagree with you.
It's an interesting subject and stuff like that. But also your book, like you said, it's for people who are in the sales field and also people at home. How else will people benefit from this book?
Well, there are really 4 audiences that it's written for. And most publishers will tell you, don't write it for a broad audience, right? Pick your audience and stick to it. But I couldn't because I recognize everybody sells, right? There isn't anyone, as we've already discussed, there isn't anybody who sells. And I think selling is the oldest profession in the world. Just ask Adam, who was persuaded by Eve to bite into that apple. If you don't believe in that, you may say the oldest profession in the world is something else, which we shouldn't talk about on this show. But I would say, no, that requires selling too. Let's be clear. So who's it written for? It's written for everybody. But specifically, I say it's written for people. And I put kind of an avatar on each of these types of people. But I talk about people who are getting into sales for the first time and want to do it right the first time. They don't want to have to muddle through it. They certainly don't want to have to take a shower every day after work because they're doing sales in a sleazy, slimy, shady way. It's written for the veteran salesperson who's already good, but recognizes that you're only as good as, quote, your last sale, and the young people are on your heels, so you got to keep improving your skills. It's written for someone who leads salespeople, even though they may not want to be in sales themselves. In other words, I'm the CEO, I'm the business owner, I'm not really the salesperson, but I need to appreciate what my salespeople are being asked to do, so I want to understand their craft better. And fourth, it's written for people who support salespeople, meaning either moral support or people who literally at their work need to be a supportive function of the sales function. Okay. And so it's written with those in mind, but throughout, we have scattered throughout the book, we have applications where, okay, we just did this in a work application. Can you see how this is going to work when you're dating? when you're
selling right there.
Yeah, exactly. So people come to that conclusion much faster than I can tell them to. It's quite obvious.
Well, like you said, dating, selling, like we just said a second ago, that's fairly important too. There's also a podcast. You also host a podcast. What is the name of your podcast?
It's called Game Face Execs. The name of my business, as I mentioned, was Game Face Incorporated. So Game Face Execs features people who I think have been persuasive, influential, and inspiring in life, whether in their career or in their service to the community. So those are the kinds of people I love to, get into their mind and to find out what has motivated them to be so persuasive and influential in their life. And so we have people from a wide array of industries and subject matter.
What are some of your guests on your show?
Well, we've had, for example, Stephen M. R. Covey, a best-selling author who wrote The Speed of Trust. We have the CEO of Columbia Sportswear, the CEO of At Home, the CEO of Cotopaxi, which is a very philanthropic company that manufactures goods in third world countries to assist their population. We have television personalities who are stars on TV programs, whether they be reality shows or episodic television. We've had authors, we've had musicians, we've had athletes, former athletes, Hall of Fame hockey players. So it just really runs the gamut. In fact, one of my first guests was a man who's considered the #1 golf course developer in the world.
Oh, wow.
Who happens to be a personal friend of mine. So it's a very diverse group of guests. And so we have something, I think, for everybody.
Well, I got a chance to listen to one about the recent episode about 9/11, and I really liked it. It was a really interesting episode.
Thank you, Joe.
And it was really, and you have that voice. You just have that voice for, like, you should have been on radio. I really do think that's just me. Well, wrap it up. Final thoughts. Anything you want to leave with the audience about being a salesperson at home or in life?
Well, if anyone wants to learn more about my business or what we do, a little bit more about my background, they can always go to my GameFaceInc.com website. That's GameFaceInc.com. But Joe, I really appreciate this conversation we've had, and I appreciate the relationship that we started some time ago. And of course, your show. So I'd like to, with your permission, I'd like to extend a special invitation to your audience.
Okay.
I'm gonna share my personal email address, which is RYC. Those are my initials, RYC at GameFaceInc.com. And if anyone is interested in getting a few free video trainings on sales, some video segments that I put together on sales, and they're very short, but there's several of them that I'll send to your listeners. And it's just my way of thanking them for getting this far into my interview with you, as well as giving them some helpful tips that they can use at work, they can use at home. And so what I'd ask them to do, though, so that I know it's them, so that I know who to give these free videos to, I'll send them a link, is in the subject line, just put "No Sitting on the Sideline Dad." So the name of your show, just put that in the subject line. And when I see that, I will know, okay, this is someone I need to send some free videos to. And I think they'll find them helpful. And if they don't find them helpful, I know they've got someone in the world who would find them helpful, and they're free to pass them on to someone else.
Thank you, Rob. I really do appreciate that. And the offer to my audience, I really do appreciate that. All that information, all links will be in the episode notes for this show. I really do appreciate your time and coming on tonight and on a Friday night and spending time with me. I really do appreciate it, sir.
Hey, I love spending Friday nights talking about dads and two dads. So thanks so much.